Tonight, as this small Texas town remembers 21 lives stolen, we're learning more about the nightmare that unfolded inside Robb Elementary as a killer unleashed his rampage on children and teachers celebrating their last week of school.
That clip is from NBC News after America's latest mass shooting. This one at Robb Elementary School on May 24th, 2022 in Uvalde, Texas, where 21 people were killed. 2 teachers, 19 school children. This is the Engel Angle podcast, and I am Fort Worth Star-Telegram columnist Mac Engel. The purpose of this episode is not to go over the timeline of events from that day. If you are listening to this, you are already aware of some of the details that are beyond the comprehension of your standard terrible American tragedy, primarily because of the catastrophic failure by the law enforcement officials in that community to protect children. The purpose of this episode is to talk about guns and the future of guns in America. This is not a through line of guns. This is more about where we are with them and where we are going with them, because they are a part of our society. To do this, I enlisted the help of a trusted expert on the Second Amendment. He is a graduate of Baylor University and Texas Wesleyan's Law School. After serving in the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office, he started his own firm here in Fort Worth. By trade, he serves a variety of clients, and the Second Amendment has become a specialty of his. In our conversation, I try to subtract any right or left direction or blue or red colors and just try to stick to what is rather than what should be. Please welcome a man I am fortunate enough to call my friend. He is Mr. Justin Sparks. Now, one last thing. This was recorded in his office, and you will notice the microphone unfortunately picked up a lot of air in the room. So please forgive me. Did your feelings about gun laws change after this most recent one, the Uvalde one?
So I think the interesting thing is where the law is in the Bill of Rights. It's our Second Amendment countrywide, right? And it's up to the states to do more or less whatever they see fit. And so it's unique in how it applies, right? I think as a result of Uvalde, I think what we're going to see is it's going to be 21 and up across the board in Texas. I think that's what's going to happen.
Will 21 and up do anything?
I think it will. I think, we saw it in Florida. Florida had, I think it was Parkland Elementary years ago. Well, it was only 4 or 5 years ago. They actually, in response to it, the governor signed into law, said, hey, 21 and up across the board. It was appealed, it was upheld. Nothing has happened since then. Not saying that it would or should, but I think that'll make a little bit of difference. I don't know that it's really solving any major problems. I think in Texas, we're seen as very gun friendly. If Texas does it, a lot of other states will follow. So I do anticipate a pretty big fight over that, though.
Are you talking about the upcoming the special session that they called for?
Yes.
When you say a fight over it, is this going to be, are you anticipating just more of the same? Walk out of the room, they want this, I want this, we're not going to do this, and it gets nowhere?
I think there will be some of that. I think it'll be interesting to see countrywide groups like NRA or different lobbyists on both sides of it. It's going to be more funded than any other state has seen.
Like the running joke, Justin, is like Democrats are great, the ideals are great, and you put them together, they can't organize a bake sale. Just going to be any different?
I don't think it is. I think you're exactly right. And I think that's where you see how the NRA is so powerful. They've been organized for years. Unified Front, they've stood for the same thing for years. There's just not really a nationwide organization that can compete with them that's on the other side of it.
Okay, so in your humble opinion, having done this now for a long time, is there really a way to write legislation that would accommodate a law-abiding gun owner? You and I both, you're one of them. We have tons of friends who abide by those laws and respect the power of a gun accordingly and what it can do. Can a law accommodate those people and reduce what looks like an incredible rise in mass shootings?
I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. Is our Second Amendment, right? So our framers of the Constitution wrote this Constitution, and then 5 years later come the Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. And the Bill of Rights essentially are, oh yeah, we need to add in a few more things here. And those are all personal people rights. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting how they're all worded. But the way it's written in the location of it, being in the Constitution, is what's going to prohibit it from changing. I think we'll have this continued fight for decades to come. I don't think there's going to be anything that'll change, drastically. I also, because it's located there, don't think a city, a county, or a state can legislate around that. I think that will be challenged. It'll go to court. It'll drag out for 3, 4, 5 years. Ultimately, depending on who's on the Supreme Court at that time, can make that decision. To really answer your question, can we create or legislate a law that sort of keeps everybody happy, right? Gun owners, can still have their guns. It's not much more red tape, but at the same time help reduce dangers. I just don't think it's possible.
So anytime this subject comes up, invariably the Second Amendment is mentioned ad nauseum. In case you forgot, this is how the Second Amendment reads: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So when you read that today, where is the flaw? Or is there a flaw?
I think if the same people that wrote that were here today, I think they would still write it the same way.
Do you really?
I do. It was 100% intentional. I don't think there's any word that's unintentional.
Totally agree.
The reason I say that, too, is you look at the Bill of Rights as a whole. Mm-hmm. Individually, each one has a Fourth Amendment, right? Protection from unreasonable searches or seizures. They put the word unreasonable in there. That was intentional, right? They put it in there saying, well, there's probably times where it is reasonable for the government to intervene. Okay?
Do you think they did that as a CYA on some of these? Because I did. I always thought they gave themselves an out. Well, this isn't on us. This on you down the road.
I do. I think that's a really good point. I think so. But I also think that goes towards the Second Amendment, too, because the way that's written, there is no out. It's just uninfringed.
I listened to a podcast called My History Can Beat Your Politics. And the creator's point about the Founding Fathers was whatever issue existed then, they would try to specifically address it. And his point is, he thinks they would have today, regardless of the issue. So in the 1780s, a gun was a musket or a pistol. That was it. The Gatling gun, which was the world's first automatic weapon, as it could fire about 200 rounds a minute, and it was operated by a hand crank, that didn't come around until 1862. The Tommy gun, which was a hands-held submachine gun, that was invented in 1918. The point is, the Founding Fathers had no idea this was coming. And this, again, the podcaster's point was, had they known, if you look at the record, they would have tried specifically to address whatever it was, and as a result, potentially been more restrictive to gun possession. Do you agree or not agree?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that probably It's the inverse of that, though, is they allowed the people to possess just as much firepower as the government.
Yeah, which now is...
Which we don't want that.
Right.
With nuclear weapons and everything else we have. We don't want that. I don't think that's a good idea. So would they have limited it in that sense? Probably.
What happened? Like, how did we get from that sentence, counteract a tyrannical federal government, to today, when I think anybody would acknowledge, yeah, this is kind of a mess?
I think how that happens is you start out saying, we're going to develop this country. We're going to give states powers, right? And then we get, fast forward several decades, all of a sudden one state's doing better than the other. Or, well, federal government, y'all need to slow them down or speed us up. You start sort of fighting for that federal money, right? Because they ultimately, no state is richer than the federal government, right? And so it becomes a money fight. And that's kind of how we get to that point.
Did that happen in the 1930s, or was it earlier than that when it became an issue of funding? Which is, if you don't, like, I remember the drinking age law. Louisiana wouldn't raise it from 18 to 21, and then the federal government basically said, if you don't raise it from 18 to 21, you're not getting this money. Like, done. Is that similar to this?
I think it is. I think it absolutely is. And I think too, if our Second Amendment, if that was not in the Bill of Rights, if that was totally left out and it was just created as a statute later on, decades later, we would be in that position. I think it would be a total yo-yo. Our federal government, depending on who's in power, would have more gun control, less gun control, and it would be tied to funding. Total pendulum.
Whenever a mass shooting happens, right after the Second Amendment is mentioned, it's followed immediately by the NRA. The National Rifle Association was founded in 1871 to advance rifle marksmanship. Probably changed a little bit since then, but the point is that the organization is routinely blamed for everything associated with a firearm these days. In your mind, is this organization on the hook for the rise in mass shootings that we see?
I don't think they are. I think it's a popular misconception, and I'll tell you why. Is NRA, I mean, they are exactly what they say they are. They're a gun activist. They're a gun lobbyist. I mean, that is their purpose. They're not here to be moderators. They're not here to say, well, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe we should control more of that. No, they get donations. They operate for the group they represent, and that group is total sort of constitutional carry. Second Amendment, it should be the only gun law. We all should be allowed firearms. So they're kind of paid to say that, and they say it, and they don't hide it either. And so I don't know that they are big, they are powerful, they've become involved with politics and contribution, so they are kind of on a bigger stage and at a higher level, but fundamentally, we're kind of all putting them on that level as well.
What do you mean by that? We're putting them on that level?
We seem to be the first gun group we go to on anything like this is NRA. But what does the NRA say?
But there is. Am I wrong in thinking that aren't there other pretty significant pro-gun lobbying groups that donate to political action campaigns and things like that too?
There are.
Why don't we ever hear about any of them? Are they don't have a cute nickname?
Right. I think NRA is the oldest.
Right.
I think they are more contributions countrywide. They have experts in every city and county. They have volunteers everywhere. I think they're just the biggest group.
Are they molding legislation?
I think they're definitely helping. I think they're definitely helping to mold it. Sure. I mean, any lobbyist group like that with that much power, that much money, sure.
Is it as powerful as it was, say, in 1998? I'm thinking when Bush was president, the first one.
No, I don't think so. I think they're a little less powerful, and I'll tell you why. Part of it is some of the politicians they have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those guys are already stuck with what they've said for the last 2 decades or whatever it may be, right? So if they already believe this, a great example, a Texas politician, right?
I'm talking about Cornyn,
Cruz, someone like that.
Yeah.
they're not going to go get reelected by saying we need more gun control.
Okay.
Right. So whether NRA backs them or not, they can't vote against guns. They've made their bed. They got to lie in it. Right. And they truly believe it. They're not trying to flip flop. I don't think. But I don't think they can go flip. Now it helps the organization to be tied with them as an elected official and one of the top officials in the state. So they're still going to have a relationship. But I don't know that I don't think the NRA is more powerful.
So when you see coverage in the media, let's take social media out of it. The knee-jerk reaction person, take that person out of it, and you see coverage in any sort of name news organization. What are the things that you see consistently that fuel misconceptions and are flat out inaccuracies that have become widely accepted beliefs? Or are there any?
Mainly it's you don't have to pass a background check, right? Well, that's not right. There are background checks.
It's just quick though, right?
It's very quick.
You can get into the database fast.
You can.
Okay.
You absolutely can. You and I go down to the gun store right now. We can probably an hour later have a gun in our hands, no problem.
Okay.
Probably less than that.
Like 10, I was thinking like 10, 15 minutes.
Yes.
Right.
Majority of people, yes.
And the reason why it changed, it was my understanding, is because access to the database now is that much quicker than it was 25 years ago before computers, just completely changed our lives. And
you're exactly right.
Okay.
You're exactly right. Now, I will tell you, and this is part of my practice that I do every day for gun owners, is ATF, FBI, really in the last year have shifted. It's a total default. If there's a question mark on someone's record, the default answer is no firearm.
What qualifies as a question mark or a red flag these days?
Great example I can give. Somebody I helped recently, they had a divorce out of New Jersey back in the 90s. And as a matter of law in New Jersey back then, they issued a temporary protective order on all parties until the divorce was finalized. When it's finalized, it's supposed to be dismissed. But one of the prohibiting items that can keep you from obtaining a firearm is an active protective order. So FBI read that from the 90s, almost 30 years old protective order saying it's still active, still open. He can't own, possess, purchase a firearm. And so he has to go hire a New Jersey attorney to go get that closed and dismissed, which is just a form. Is all it was.
So he's got to waste $500 to get some paperwork filed.
Exactly. And so the default, years ago, that probably would have never come up.
Yeah.
They aren't digging for those. But the default was, that's part of a divorce. That's probably not, that's not criminal related. That's not a record. We don't need to, he's fine. He can go. Now the default's completely shifted. And what you're seeing now, and this is what's interesting that a lot of people don't know, is you get denied, right? For whatever reason. Maybe it's a legitimate reason, maybe it's not. Okay. You can go sue the federal government, but you got to hire an attorney and pay all this money so you can go purchase your $400 firearm. You're better off going in Texas and doing a private transaction where you don't have a background check and get that firearm, right? So we almost have set up so much red tape and so much, you don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore, according to the FBI or ATF. The default is we'll just deny them. We don't presume somebody innocent anymore, right? We just presume, no, they don't qualify. And so now all of a sudden, we're encouraging people to not be documented firearm owners, not be documented on, I bought it with this serial number that's in the federal registry. The FBI problem is now we can't fight it, right? There's not really a process. There's not a due process in that. And they know it. They know, we'll just deny it. And then maybe 6 months from now, they'll get us the paperwork from that court in New Jersey from 30 years ago, and we'll figure it all out. But it's easier for them to not deny next one.
Are there loopholes to that? I think we talked about this one time years ago. If a person wanted to go to an estate sale, you see estate sales all the time, people selling guns. Some of them are junk, some are pretty nice. It's my understanding if it's an estate sale that's antique-ish, you can buy it without a background check. True?
You can. Gun shows, still loopholes. If if you are a dealer, a licensed dealer, you have to run a background check no matter when, where, anywhere you go, right?
Okay. But an estate sale is not a licensed dealer.
Estate sales not. If all of a sudden I want to sell whatever firearm I own, I can get on Facebook and I can say, hey, gun for sale. And somebody can message me and I can say, hey, I'll meet you in the Walmart parking lot. And here's cash, here's gun, see you later.
And there's zero registration, nothing like that, right?
Nothing.
Is it too easy to get a gun in this country?
You know, it is privately maybe, but the interesting part about that is, and we keep going back to the Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it guarantees that right. Then you start getting into, well, private commerce versus public commerce, how much regulation, how much red tape. Honestly, if our government's really smart, yeah.
Speaking of Santa Claus, go ahead.
They don't want to make it too difficult, because then you run into the problem of nobody's going to go through their process anymore, because you ultimately still have the right to buy it privately.
Is that federal or is that just state?
It's federal.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot. A lot of people don't realize this. In Texas, at least, you go to buy a firearm, that's a federal background check.
Okay.
Now, they're accessing the federal in the Texas state records, right?
Mhm.
In the countrywide, all interstate records. Texas does not also require their own background check or any. There's no Texas red tape. Okay, they designed it that way so it's fully reliant on the federal government, right? You know, why do it twice? You know, and spend money on Texas employees doing that.
If a person wanted to buy an automatic weapon, you know, not a semi, but a fully, you know, an automatic weapon, what would they have to do that?
You have to have a federal license.
Are those hard to get?
Really hard. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of background check. I mean, if you qualify, you qualify. The wait time on these, sort of what I know recently, is over 12 months.
Oh, wow.
So, and it's fully full federal license, and then good luck finding a dealer that has one.
Yeah, I was going to say, where would you find them, or is that all black market stuff?
You can find it if you really want it.
Mm-hmm.
You probably have to go to a store that does a high volume of just firearms in general, and you probably have to pre-order it, prepay for it before they order it from a manufacturer.
And then you got to wait a year, basically.
Yes.
But when there's a mass shooting, people will come out and say, either right-wing pundits, usually it's right-wing pundits, mental health has become one of the fallbacks. Do you buy it?
I do. I don't think it's the sole reason.
No, neither do I.
I think it does contribute. We see it in, you know, I'm a practicing attorney. I'm in the courts all the time. We see it in the court system. It is on the rise big time. I think it's a combination of, there is more of it just with recent history and everything that we've been through as a population. But I also think it's more recognizable. It's more socially acceptable to admit to it or to seek help.
For sure.
So I think maybe some of it did exist prior and we just didn't know.
I do think at some point in this debate, whether you're pro or you're, you know, just crazy left-wing, put all guns at the bottom of the ocean, you have to acknowledge, at least rhetorically, access is probably a problem. Like, you have to at least rhetorically introduce the element of access to it. Do you agree with that or not?
Access does need to be addressed. We do need to think about it. You know, I think we will see slowly states start to do more of it. Texas has that. You know, if you've been adjudicated, meaning you've actually gone through a court proceeding and there's been a signature on it by a judge.
So even if you're 15, you've been in a juvenile court system.
If you're adjudicated with a sort of mental deficiency or competency issue, then you're prohibited.
Okay.
That's been there for a while. I've seen it more recently where it's actually come up where there is denials based on that reason. I think we're going to see more and more of that by each state. I think that's where we go from here. I think Texas says 21 across the board. Mm-hmm. Whether that happens in our special session or next legislative session, I think it's coming. I think on top of that, sort of your next items that, you know, are agreeable for both sides are going to be sort of domestic violence, mental competency, I think you start seeing a lot more proactive laws in place on those. The hard part is going to be actually following through on those.
So they're proposing, when you mean following through, you mean from a legislative standpoint and approving it and signing it, or actually enforcing it?
Enforcing it. Just because our law has so much due process in place with you're presumed reasonable or you're presumed innocent, or you have all these presumptions. We give everybody the benefit of the doubt, right? We can't write laws that all of a sudden say, no, you need to prove to the government you are X before you can exercise a constitutional right.
Invariably, here's another one that you'll hear. I know you've seen it. We're the only society where this issue is as pervasive as it is. You can look at other societies that have money, they have crime, they have attacks, they have various and sundry tragedies, but it seems like this is our thing. Sad to say, as it is. I have theories on that. Why do you think it is?
I think worldwide perspective, we're one of the younger countries. We're definitely one of the most progressive. Capitalism.
That's my big one. Yeah.
Is probably the main contributor.
Yeah.
And honestly, I see this on my business too, in representing gun owners. Having the politics yo-yo. All of a sudden we gun control, and then all of a sudden we swing the opposite way. It creates this fear. It creates a market, is what it really does.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. I don't know if I'm wrong on this one, but when there's a fear of change an elected presidential official, mass shooting, gun stores cash in.
100%. 100%. And you have...
What are they doing with all of it? Seriously, is this like some nuclear, panic buying?
I think, too, there's a lot of folks that are sort of collectible hobby folks that just love the intricacies of each firearm. And a lot of them, honestly, never go shoot them. Or it's some gun manufacturer that no longer is in existence or was purchased by somebody else, some limited firearm. It's a volatile market for collectibles. And quite frankly, our federal government allows for you to buy and sell if you're enhancing a collection.
I mentioned this earlier, and we're seeing this now. Special interest groups carefully waiting for the Supreme Court to be one direction. We saw two cases, one in 1939 and the other one in 2008, that looked to legislate that sort of ruled in favor of individual gun ownership. If in 20 years the court isn't left, that leans left, Justin, which I don't think it will, but let's say in 20 years it does, do you foresee something, given the way everything is progressing, that there will be enough momentum that people will make a real run at changing, basically really trying to modify the Second Amendment as we know it?
100% yes.
Really?
Without a doubt. I think what we'll see, if that happens, we'll see probably a city or a state try to pass a local law.
And then it'll go up?
And then it'll go up the chain. And I think, too, what's going to be interesting on that is most of your justices in the United States Supreme Court are constitutionalists at heart. And it's going to be really interesting. A lot of times when they start attacking anything in the Bill of Rights, some of those justices kind of shoot off in directions that you didn't see before on any other issue. And so that'll actually be really interesting to see, the one Bill of Rights that we have that's almost absolute, that shall not be infringed. Mm-hmm. Where are they going to put that? Because that's your slippery slope question, right? All of a sudden they say, well, we can change that and do this. Well, okay, what about free speech, religion, privacy, where those weren't as protected as this one, according to our authors of the Bill of Rights? So where do we land on those? So
do you think the people who would attack that position of going after the Second Amendment, they would sell it as, wait a minute, if we do this is a gateway to undoing all these?
That's the danger. That's the absolute danger.
So we saw back in the 80s, and I remember this because I was young and I was very, I bought Just Say No. I was one of the Nancy Reaganites. I was like, yeah, okay, I won't do drugs. Weed's terrible. All these things are awful, horrible. Put them in jail. And as we know now, without any any hesitation, the laws really didn't work. And now marijuana consumption is pretty much legal. Is the analogy being made? Is the war against guns, for lack of a better term, I know that doesn't exist, but is this analogous to that, the war on drugs?
I don't think so. I think, honestly, I think it's having something like the war on drugs be recreated to like a war on guns or any other issue. I don't think we'll ever see that again for any issue. And I think that's several things. Trust in government is at an all-time low, no matter what side we're on. But also our access to information. We all feel like, I have access to the inside information on this, which we really don't. But we all feel like we do because we're overloaded with information every day. So, whereas before, you relied on your government to supply that information.
Is there any country out there? I hit on it a couple questions ago, but is there any country out there that gets it right? Now, there's so much. And the one thing I hate about this debate, is that nobody wants to allow for the fact that we're a nation of 336 million people. And if you have 336 million people, that's going to be a shit show. There's going to be it's going to be a mess. So whenever Finland does this, well, okay, how big is Finland? Or whatever country it is. Well, Australia does this. Okay, Australia isn't as big as New York City. But take that aside, is there any nation out there that you see, no, that's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good standard.
I don't think so. And you hit it on the head. I think with our population size, we will never all agree on the same things.
Oh, yeah, forget agreement. Just in practice.
Oh, I see.
But it's both. It's both.
It's both. I mean, in practice, you want... How many private citizens do you want owning firearms, right? There are so many firearms here, whether they're legal or illegal, black market, sold in the store, whether there's so many available, there will always be firearms here, right? That we will never eradicate every single firearm off this country. So knowing that, you get your examples you get the terrible examples like Uvalde. That's awful. That's a terrible thing. You get the examples of, here outside of Fort Worth, we had a shooter come into a church, and luckily there was somebody armed in the church that was able to defuse the situation and save who knows how many lives. There's always going to be two sides of that coin. So there's countries that say it's just illegal for everybody or anybody to possess them. Somebody in that country has one, and they can create a lot of damage, and nobody can help. Until police arrive.
Since all this stuff has happened, let's start the Las Vegas one. Have you been in public settings? Let's go back even before that. The movie theater in Denver, when they were at the Dark Knight movie, and the guy comes in and he shoots a bunch of innocent people, and then it's just progressively. But has your attitude when you are in a public setting changed because of all of these things?
Mine has.
Has it?
It has. So
mine has, for sure.
After the movie theater, for sure. So I do some teaching too. I help teach CLE instructors.
Tell everybody what CHL. What is that? What does that stand for?
CHL, so Concealed Handgun License Instructors, which is now licensed to carry in Texas. So help teach the law on that. I help speak and educate. Pre-COVID, we did a lot of speaking to help educate gun owners, what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do. Which is two different questions. What are you legally able to do versus what you should do? And honestly, in speaking with, would teach with law enforcement, have taught law enforcement as well. And in really speaking with them, you learn sort of how their mind operates, and then you hear about something like the movie theater, which God forbid is terrible, but then you talk to an officer about it, and they're like, that's why I always sit on the back row, or that's why I always paying attention to where I'm facing, or when I go to a restaurant, my back's never to the door, things like that. So then you hear about this experience, and then you're helping to teach on it too. All of a sudden, it becomes next time you go to a movie theater, you start thinking about it. You start thinking about, who's sitting behind me, who's in that back corner, where's the door, where's the entrances, is there more than one? Absolutely.
Of all of the popular TV shows or movies that depict the legal profession, which is the one that actually gets it pretty close to right.
If you look on a just procedural standpoint,
Yeah.
timeline, how a case progresses, actually the original Law and Order,
The original.
the original
Yeah.
original was pretty spot on as far as something happens, investigation. We have these little hearings, negotiations, and then a trial. Now it obviously takes more than 30 minutes.
All right, yeah.
Honestly, so I've had this question recently: is the new one the show Lincoln Lawyer, which was originally a book, then a movie, Matthew McConaughey, and now a TV show.
Is it good? I haven't seen it.
I've watched it actually just recently because I've had so many people ask me about it. Like, is it accurate? Is it this? The only real accuracy, as far as from a legal standpoint goes, is the way he goes about in trial in presenting to a jury is excellent. I mean, I was actually pretty surprised about how he talks about his jury selection, his opening statement, questioning witnesses. They did a really good job in that. I don't know who they talked to or consulted with, but that's probably the most recent show that I've seen as far as courtroom strategy goes. That's pretty spot on.
All right, so we've just cut under 45 minutes. This is probably a little bit longer than I wanted to, but you're so interesting. I just kept bugging you with questions. So will I be charged an additional 15 minutes, or do I get charged in 3 15-minute increments?
Well, I'm going to talk to get to 46 minutes later.
All right, that's good. Okay, I had to cut him off there because I just wasn't exactly sure I was on the shot clock, and I didn't want to be charged another 15-minute block. I'm kidding, of course. It's just a joke. But I do sincerely want to thank Justin Sparks for giving me his time and expertise on a complicated matter that has many commendable concepts, loads of absurd ones, and the reality is no concrete solutions. This is where we are, and it is a mess.